After assigning the initial shader, I'm going to rename the material node just so it's a bit easier to track. I'll call it the flame material. And I'm going to replace the blend shader with a particle renderer. Now, particle renderer, if I drag and drop this into my graph, is really just a combination of two nodes, the particle density node and the particle volume node. They just happen to be built inside of a compound with a few other multi-math shaders for good measure. If I edit the particle renderer and I expand it full size, you'll notice that it's a particle volume cloud with a particle density shader plugged into it, and a few Boolean switches to drive the per particle color or the per cloud or gradient color, as well as an ambient color adjustment. So we can take advantage of that compound and plug it into the volume input of the flame material and blow away the blend shader. We're going to use a few more shaders to control the overall look and color of our volumetric cloud, but let's see what we have initially just by drawing a render region. My aliasing, keep in mind, is at about a mid-level right now. I don't see anything to begin. That's because I need to really work on the density of the renderer. We have a lot of particles, but they're very small and fine. If I double-click on the renderer, I want to be able to increase the density of the cloud without increasing the size of the particles. A lot of times when you deal with particles at a very large size, you lose the accuracy and detail necessary for something like a flame. Large size particles work well for clouds, but not for something that is a solid like a flame. So to do this, I'm going to increase the overall density limit on the particles, which should give me a bit more volume to work with. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to increase the visibility of the particles. And then I can also work with the global density by raising it a little bit more. So if I raise the overall global density of the particles to, say, 100, I get more particles to work with. Now overall, I need to amplify the color of my point cloud, and that will again give me a little bit more density in my volume. To do that, I'm going to use the volume color tab of the particle renderer, and I'm going to increase the overall ambient intensity as well as the tint color. When we're dealing with something like flames, unless we want to use scattering, I really don't need to use the diffuse illumination. I can get all my illumination from the ambient intensity and the resulting gradient shader that'll be plugged into my particle renderer. So I'm not going to use scattering on this particular effect, so I'll disable the diffuse illumination. So we lose a lot of color to our cloud, but we can compensate by raising the ambient intensity. The intensity is tinted somewhat, so I'll actually raise the tint color, which will give us a bit more volume to the particles again. One of the other things that's really going to help fill in a lot of these gaps, if I just truck in a little closer here to my cloud, draw another render region, is to control the marching or the smoothing of the particles, the blending. On the volume rendering tab, there's two attributes that we're going to control. First of all is the marching detail. If we raise the marching detail to have high settings, we'll notice that the particles blend together in a more interesting way. So we get some areas of transparency followed by some areas with a higher opaqueness. I can also lower the cell size on the lookup table, keeping in mind that the particle render is really just a particle volume cloud. By lowering the cell size, we allow for more details to show through in the particles themselves. Again, we have to strike a balance between long render times and a good look to our particle system. The other thing that I can do is change the interpolation type on the shadow table from linear to cubic, which should give me a small amount of change to the particles. I should be able to fill in a few more of the gaps. Back on the density tab, if I raise the density perhaps a little bit more, it doesn't look like it's having as big of an effect as I want. So one of the other things we could do is even increase the ambience intensity. So if I was to raise the ambience intensity to 1.5, I'll get an increase in brightness. At some point we want to use the gradient shader to help us out, but at this point I'm really just looking to get a brightly lit point cloud with a lot of detail apparent in it.